Thanks for watching Facing Trans, Empowerment, Advocacy, and Inclusion. It's one of 4 discs that make up Even Better Diversity Training, and I'm really excited that you watched it. What I wanted to do now was to offer a supplementary video to talk about the handouts and also how you can customize this information for your organization, for your meeting, or your place of work, or even personal use. Before we get to that though, I'd like to thank first Rick Goodman and GoToWebinar for making it so easy to make these videos available. If you go to Advantage CE, as in continuing education, seminars.com, Rick and his team are happy to help you. He's also a great trainer and speaker himself. If you have any questions about those Human Resources Certified Institute HRCI credits, you're welcome to give Rick and his team a call at 1-888-267-6097. The HRCI accreditation is also really exciting, and thanks a lot, Rick, for your help there. If you're interested in texting me, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have or any kind of situations that may be coming up. My text number is 202-670-4262. 202-670-4262. You can text message me anything you want, and I'm happy to come up with an answer. And if I don't know it, you get extra points for stumping me, and then I'll find your answer. You can also drop me an email at engage@goodenoughnow.com. And if you want even more stuff, you can go to Kiwi Live. Kiwi like the fruit, live like not dead.com. They'll ask you for a keyword. Just type in my last name, Pettit, Pettitt. Now, in this particular training, we talked a lot about sex, gender, sexual identity, and then how that fits in with sexism and heterosexism. The reason why I think this is such an important place to talk or to start a talk is because if we don't have a common sense of what language we're using, but more importantly, how we fit into this model, it's really hard to make any kind of accommodations or adjust policies or procedures. Every single one of us has a sexuality, a gender, and a sexual identity. We all have a physical body. We all have gender roles, identity, as well as expressions. We perceive gender of others, and we send out information through our roles, identity, and expressions so that other people can validate our identity by their perceptions of us. That's really key. And then in our relationships, those also have labels, and they work really, really importantly and closely together. Typically, we conflate them all down, but I think to really understand and to really be appropriate, we need to pull them apart and look at them individually. Then we talked about how sexism is policing between sex and gender, and how heterosexism polices sex and gender and sexual identity. Then at that intersection is where power and privilege comes to play. Now you'll notice there are some supplementary handouts. So what I thought I would do is kind of go through those handouts with you, and you're welcome to customize them and use them in any way you would like. Feel free. If you have any questions or you need my help with that customization, again, just drop me an email at engage@goodenoughnow.com or send me a text or give me a call. I'm happy to help. But in the meantime, let's go through the handouts just so that we have a better understanding of kind of the language that may come up in these conversations and how that might be of assistance. Now, the first handout is an umbrella, and you'll hear the term umbrella term a lot when we talk about these subjects. So I use trans as an umbrella term to include all of this stuff. So what I want to do is go through some of the key terms that often come up in these conversations, and I'm going to keep them in kind of a binary. And I'm going to show you kind of the cliff notes of each of the elements of each binary and how they are similar or different from each other. So first, when we talk about the trans umbrella, transsexual and transgender are usually what comes up. So key points of differentiation is transsexual is typically a word to describe someone who is altered or is interested in altering their physical body, either through hormone treatment or surgery or something like that. Transgender started being used to be more inclusive of people who were not interested in altering their body, or more importantly, don't have access to the ability to alter their bodies. Medical care is very hard to get. There aren't a lot of providers that do it, and it can often be very expensive. So transgender started being used to be a little bit more inclusive. And to be even more inclusive, I use the word trans. Now, next up, we have cross-dressers and drag queens. These two words usually come up, and the Cliff Note difference between the two is a cross-dresser may be someone who wears the other gender's clothing, and it very much is a private act. It's not usually done in public. People don't usually know about it. It's usually kept very secret. These people may have been called transvestites in the past. You may be more familiar with that term. We don't use that term so much anymore. We use cross-dresser instead. But the key thing to remember is it's very private. Now, drag queen or drag king doing drag is the exact opposite. It's wearing the other gender's clothing, but in a very public or performative way. A drag king is more likely to be a woman who is wearing men's clothing. A drag queen is more likely to be a man who is wearing women's clothing. There are lots of variations, but the key thing to remember is that it's a very public performance. We also have intersex and genderqueer or gender variant. What I think is important about this is intersex condition, when we did the triangle, is over on the sex side of things, whereas trans is on the gender side of things on the triangle. This is relevant because an intersex person or a person with intersex condition has physical or anatomical parts that do not perfectly align with what we have determined a male or a female are supposed to have. When we're talking about a gender variant or gender queer person, this is someone who's expressing or identifying their gender as outside of a binary, meaning that there's more than just two options and they exist in a system that is significantly more different or more diverse than just two options. They're not interested in going from A to B or B to A, but of just being, and it's the binary system itself that's problematic, not necessarily them. So that's how you can kind of think of those two things. Now, on the sheet of terms, we also have cisgender. Cisgender is a term that came out of the trans community to describe people like me who are not trans. So I was born female, I was identified as a girl, I was raised as a girl, I grew into a woman, I identify as a woman. I have cisgender privilege or cis privilege. Cis, C-I-S, is Latin for congruent, just in case you'd like to be the winner at the next party. That's what that means. Cis means congruent. So we didn't have to transition, or we don't have to defy anything that we were labeled at birth. We talk about gender, sex, and sexuality in the triangle. The reason why is because all of these things are really important when looking at actually how to accommodate or work with a trans person. Now, the handout also has a handy-dandy blank triangle, which you're welcome to fill in. If you drew on your own paper or if you pulled this handout out, excellent. But what I recommend is you being able to photocopy this and give it to someone else in your office or in your organization and then walk them through the triangle. By being able to do that, you can welcome them into the conversation with an equal understanding of language. I think that's particularly important. Well, the next two handouts are really more about questions that often come up. I think that that's particularly important because when we talk about trans folks, often they get lumped in with the LGB community, so the lesbian, gay, or bisexual community. Trans people can identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. They can also identify as heterosexual. But trans people's needs might be different than those that are not heterosexual. So it's a particularly important thing to understand. A trans person that identifies as heterosexual may also have these particular needs. So we pulled together this particular list to be able to kind of help identify some of those things. When we start talking about those things, what I mean is the status of relationships, the ability to report any kind of emotional or physical violence, as well as in society where people may be more familiar with lesbian, gay, maybe bisexual, but maybe lesbian and gay, there's an assumption that they would then understand trans things, and that's not necessarily true. It's also the case that people who identify as trans may not automatically identify as or identify with every single trans person. There's a saying, just because you are one doesn't mean you get it. That's particularly important too. This is a challenging conversation, and each person is worthy of their own piece of that conversation. The general lack of acceptance kind of ebbs and flows depending on what's happening in the media at the given time, as well as where you are in the country. With the Supreme Court recently deciding around marriage equality, lesbian and gay relationships may be seen more equal now because they can get married. There are still areas and people that do not agree with that decision. And when you throw in a gender transition into it, it can often be even more confusing for some folks, potentially even more threatening. Generally speaking, acts of violence towards a trans person are significantly more likely to result in death or lifelong injury. It's also true that trans people have much higher rates of suicidality, addiction, chemical abuse. They're more likely to have been evicted, and they're more likely to be underemployed. As we keep going through the list, it's important to understand that often, and this could even be you, inside of an organization or a bureaucratic system, the person who's usually making up the rules, making up the policies, isn't a trans person. So for example, when I do consulting with organizations, when we're working on their non-discrimination policies, for example, somebody may say like, well, we'll work with whoever a person identified specifically by their driver's license. Well, that seems easy enough, except two things. Number one, if you happen to be a Title IX exempt organization and you outsource your definition of a gender to a governmental agency, you're no longer an exclusive organization because you've opened it up to so many interpretations. By no longer being exclusive, you could lose not only your Title IX exemption, but you're also infringing around your First Amendment rights around freedom of assembly and things like that. I think it's really important to understand that also when you say like, well, whatever someone's birth certificate says, the systems don't necessarily work together. So a birth certificate is obviously issued from the state of which you were born. Depending on how old you are, it may not have been a practice for you to actually receive a birth certificate. Some people don't even have one. And if you do have one, you might be from a state that doesn't allow any alterations to that birth certificate. So if you can't legally alter your birth certificate, in some states, then you cannot legally alter your driver's license. Your Social Security card also has a gender marker inside of it that is hidden, so it doesn't show up usually on the card. But in order to change the gender marker that's on your Social Security card, sometimes your driver's license or your birth certificate, letters from doctors, medical practitioners, things like that may be needed, which also impinges access. You also have a legal name change that may or may not be able to be done without these documentation, and these documentation updates may not be done without another piece. It really is a very, very tricky situation. I think it's also important to mention that a trans person, unlike a lesbian, gay, or even a straight person or a bisexual person, a trans person may possibly pass. There's a language that we use in that no one would know they're trans, which is generally problematic language. But if someone passes as the gender identity of which they identify, then they don't always have to come out as trans. Then when this information is disclosed, very often people feel betrayed or deceived that they didn't know the information to begin with. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, a trans person may have to constantly come out as telling the truth, and other people may feel like this is too much information or just get over it already. I think that's particularly important when we talk about gender versus sexuality because it changes. Similarly, and there is room for a lot of allyship here with bisexually identified people, in that bisexuals may be in a relationship with one or more people, and often allies, straight, gay, or lesbian, may very well say like, oh, that's great. So where do you lean? Which direction are you more likely to like? We typically have a very difficult time understanding that complexity happens. So for a bisexual person, it can be very challenging when we don't necessarily understand how they can be in relationship with one person if they have a wide variety of people that they are attracted to. I think personally it's a very high compliment to the person or persons that they're in a relationship with, because the person finds them actually satisfying. But usually it's challenged as not enough, or you're waiting for it to not be real. Bisexuals, much like trans people, are also very questioned whether or not they're going to ever be in a stable or committed relationship. And a lot of this has to do with the commonality of straight, lesbian, and gay people not understanding that some people actually can clearly communicate with one another and support one another and actually be able to manifest into a healthy relationship. We also talk about trans folks. You can also talk about not only partners, but children. Trans people may have mothered children, may have fathered children, may be currently mothering or fathering children, and those roles may or may not evolve and change with one's gender expression. The language used to describe that role may or may not evolve, and it's really important for us to remember that the language that the person chooses to use is the language that we should role model. I think it's also very key that this same tool set applies to pronouns and preferred names. So pronouns, some of us don't even know what a pronoun is. That's part of cisgender privilege. I use feminine pronouns. So you would say that this is her shirt and she is a blonde this month. Those are feminine pronouns. But what is important to understand is that pronouns that someone chooses to use, it's our job to follow suit with what their choice is. It's validating their identity. That's really, really key. By validating their identity, you're being an ally to someone's chosen identity, how they choose to express themselves, and the roles that they continue to hold. So whatever pronoun someone chooses, just follow suit. Trust that they have made a smart decision. This also goes with gender-neutral pronouns. You may hear ze or here as gender-neutral pronouns, and now it's becoming more and more common to use they and them. Those are not necessarily plural representative pronouns, but can be used in the singular case. That way you're using a gender-neutral pronoun for an individual. Make sure to ask someone, what is your preferred pronoun? Take note of it, and then follow suit. It's also important to understand that if we're going to trust that someone knows what pronoun they're going to use, we also can trust in a bathroom setting that they're in the right place. A lot of times bathroom settings are policed to such a degree, specifically in women's bathrooms, that trans people don't feel safe using the restroom. What I think is particularly challenging for that is there is not an increase in statistics of any kind of violence that occurs inside of gender-neutral bathrooms or multi-use bathrooms where people of different genders are using the restroom at the same time. But specifically, at least for me, as a woman, I have been kind of socialized with this story of kind of a predator in a dress who's going to find me in the men's bathroom, or the women's bathroom, predator in a dress in a women's bathroom, and that I am at risk, I am in danger because of this wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, if that is likely to happen, which I think it is safe to say, I'm 41 years old as of today, and I have never seen a wolf in sheep's clothing, a wolf, a sheep, or a man in a dress in a woman's bathroom. Ever, and I do actually frequently use the restroom. So I think our fear is a little, not only quantitatively unimpressive, but I also think that it's rooted in fear. And I think that fear is actually rooted in internalized sexism, which I don't think is appropriate. I am not a sitting duck. I am not a target, and I'm not a victim, nor is a man a predator. And until we debunk that particular stereotype, I don't think we're doing anything to really fight sexism. What I think is important is that if someone needs to go to the bathroom, they should be able to make a choice freely as to which bathroom they want to go in. When they are in that bathroom, it is safe that we should assume that they know where they are. There are times where I have accidentally walked into a men's restroom and I was like, oh my gosh, wrong place, and I turn around. There are other times where I have intentionally used a bathroom that was labeled for men because the line of the women's was really long, or it was in a restaurant where there's 2 single occupancy bathrooms. The women's was full, this one was open, I went to the men's. I have navigated this space without catching myself on fire once, and my guess is that other people could as well. When we talk about the concept of gender-neutral bathrooms, what's interesting is most of us grew up with gender-neutral bathrooms. We just didn't call it that. What I mean by that is that I shared a bathroom with my brother, and if there was a door open, you could go inside. So we could brush our hair together or brush our teeth together. That was fine. If the door was closed, you couldn't come in. That's really all it takes. Often when we start talking about the needs of trans people and bathrooms will come up, the concept or idea of these kind of accommodations start with like architecture and building new buildings and gutting out rooms. And really what I think it needs to come with is a conversation and maybe a piece of paper and some tape. Like, this bathroom is occupied. This bathroom is no longer occupied. It doesn't have to be threatening if we can remove the fear of the trans person from the atmosphere and allow the trans person to also let go of some of their fear of whether or not they're going to be targeted and in fact be accommodated, if not welcomed into a particular environment. I think that's particularly important. Part of this idea of being welcomed, what I think is so key about that, is really about being an ally to trans and intersex people. The last handout that I've made for you, which again, you're more than welcome to customize and make available to other people. But this is really just a baseline list of things that you can do to be more inclusive to trans and intersex people. You're also welcome to add to it. I think that these could be really good conversation starters, and I welcome the opportunity to help. Feel free to text message me at 202-670-4262. So some of the ideas of being an ally talk about, like I said, using the names and the pronouns, referencing people as well as roles or family status labels that someone chooses to use. That's important. Using non-gendered or non-specific language when inviting like a +1 to a dinner instead of a wife or a husband or even a partner. I know that I've been invited to a number of parties as a single person, and I was invited to bring a +1. I think it's important, and it's actually quite easy to do. When you're talking about like how someone's vacation was or something, don't make assumptions about who they went on vacation with. I don't think we typically do this in a lot of settings, but as soon as we kind of invoke a trans person's experience, we have a very hard time understanding of what to do, because we kind of put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know everything, and we know we don't know something. So then we get very nervous and we end up kind of messing it up. So just relax, have a conversation like you would with anybody else, and proceed from there. I think it's also important for us to do our own homework. In order to be a really good ally, you need to check in, figure out, what do I need in order to perceive someone as a man? What does it mean to be a woman? By having those conversations, you're actually going to test your own limits of what your own definitions of being a man and woman are and how you actually express yourself. Largely, I believe most people at some point have had to learn how to express themselves as compared to how their parents raised them. This is particularly important, I think, whether we're talking about clothing or the amount of space that we hold or how loud we are, how short or long our hair is. Some of us change clothes 3 or 4 times every morning before we go to work. These are all very similar skills of how it is we decide to express our gender. There's nothing wrong with that, and we actually have it in common. It's a fantastic foundation to serve as a place for empathy for trans or intersex people. It's important to assume that when you do know someone identifies as trans, gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, omnisexual, queer, anything, when you know someone identifies as something and you start interacting with someone else and they don't know that information about the other person, it's really important to know that you shouldn't be outing people. There is a difference between outing and kind of helping out. And the reason why I use that language is outing is, for me, there's like a little voice in my head that is very much connected to gossip and rumor mills, that is connected when I'm like, guess what I know? If you feel like that, you're probably outing someone. You're disclosing information that you know You're going to talk to somebody that you think doesn't know this information and it's exciting to you. Don't do that. It's not kind. It's not compassionate. It's really, really not appropriate. Let people share their own information with their own people. What I think is even more important is that if someone shared information with you, they thought you were a safe resource, or maybe they felt obligated to tell you. So what you do with that information is really, really key to your relationship with the other person. It's also very telling about your own personal character. So if that little voice comes up in your head, just know you're a human being and you can make better choices and not do that. Now, what I mean by helping out is important. What I mean by this is that if you're in public with someone whose gender expression may be somewhat ambiguous, specifically with like pronouns or names or something, maybe you can say, he would like a beer menu, or she just left to go to the restroom, to give somebody a tip as to who the person is that you're with. They will follow suit, they'll appreciate it, and specifically the trans person will appreciate not always having to be the educator. But it's also important that you don't connect helping out with that same little voice. Like, look at me, I'm using the right pronouns. Buy yourself a blue ribbon, congratulations. And it's not about you, it's about them. When I talked about someone who comes out to you, it's really important to understand that a trans person or intersex person knows that they're trans and intersex. When somebody has chosen to come out to you, it's really important to understand that they have done a complete inventory of everybody in their life. And they have chosen you, or they have felt mandated to tell you. What you do with that information tells about your character. There is a very good possibility that someone will choose you and you feel that they have chosen poorly. You do not feel adequately prepared. You're not adequately trained. You don't know what to say. You don't know everything. You don't know how to make referrals. That could be very true. You could actually be a complete disaster. I know there are things where I am a complete disaster and a total hot mess. Total hot mess. What's important to remember, though, is that this person has done an inventory of their life, and you are the best thing they have. For some of us, that's terrifying, but that doesn't mean that you are not the best option they have. So if they have chosen you, you are the best thing they have. So do the best you can with what you have. Try and help them out. Really, listening is the key piece to being an ally. And by listening, you're actually able to legitimately engage with someone. You don't have to ask educational-based questions. You can ask, what does that mean for you? Tell me more. How can I be of assistance? What kind of assistance do you need if I can't help you? These kind of key questions are really important, and it allows a person to feel seen and to feel heard. And that's really at the root of all ally work. So even if you don't feel qualified, just know that in their life, you're the closest thing they have. So what are you going to do with that? Maybe take some opportunities now and do a little bit of research on the internet. Find out what local resources are available, what resources are provided by your organization or your place of employment or inside of your community, so that if you are in the position, you can say, hold on, I actually know something about this, or I know a doctor, or I know a therapist, or a grocery store, or a community group, or something like that, or a cafe. Being able to give some of that information is really helpful. The person may already know it, but you know it too, and that's a connection. It's a really key piece. So when you're done watching this video, I recommend kind of doing some local research and figuring out what is available, maybe what isn't available. They probably have done a Google search as well, but you can do the same thing and then start in a more educated place instead of being completely blindsided and feeling inadequate and unprepared. It's your job to be prepared. Thank you very much for watching this. I really do appreciate it. As I said at the beginning, there's 4 trainings in the Even Better Diversity Training box, so I highly recommend that you visit those. The first one is Inclusion Beyond the Law. The second one looks specifically at LGBT and heterosexual and looks at those communities individually, as well as the stereotypes and language and images that are connected with those words and how that connects into other systems of oppression. Next, the fourth one is actually on being a better ally, where we're really going to look at listening skills. We're going to look at kind of broader strokes of how to do the best you can with what you got some of the time. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments or questions, please feel free to send me a text at 202-670-4262. Again, my name is Jessica Pettit. You can also email me at engage@goodenoughnow, aren't we all, goodenoughnow.com. And if you would like more handouts and videos and things, you can go to Kiwi Live, kiwi like the fruit, live like not dead, .com. It'll ask you for a keyword and type in my last name, Pettitt. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. And if there's anything else I can do to help, just let me know. Thank you.